Over my long time on Roblox, the one game that has maintained the most amount of traction over the years is my open-ended adventure platformer, Castle in the Sky. So much so that in 2015, I performed a massive upgrade to the game that added a bunch of optional side areas. This was the Ascension update. These areas I dubbed Sky Ruins, and to complete them, it required the help of at least one other player. Your reward for completing a Sky Ruin was one of 3 special tools to improve on your ability to navigate through the castle. While it was perfectly possible to play through the game without obtaining these abilities, doing so would allow you to take otherwise impossible shortcuts, like this.
Oh. Hey, we did it. We got up here. Okay.
This increased the number of routes you could take through the game considerably, in a game that already allowed a great degree of choice in that regard. Because of this and the fact that Ascension had a global leaderboard for best time, the game developed a small speedrunning scene. What about sequels though? Well, I actually have a lot of projects that iterated on the gameplay formula that was established in this game. Let's spend this video taking a look at them. My first attempt was a game originally titled Temple in the Sea. It was basically Castle in the Sky, but instead of being constrained to one big area, you would travel between a bunch of different islands, reminiscent of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. This project didn't get far though, with only 2 islands ever created for it, and only one that really had any level design in it. Another was a game that never really got a title, so I simply refer to now as Open World Adventure. While it had the same platforming elements and checkpoint system as Castle in the Sky, it was also to be more laid back and freeform, with you exploring a big open world and taking on small quests in whatever order you want. It was also meant to have combat and an experience point system. All that materialized for it though was a rough, unfinished map before it was dropped. Besides successor games that were really intended to be their own thing, there were also some attempts to build on the Castle in the Sky game itself that never came to be. One was a linear gauntlet of challenges you could take on after beating the game. Each of these challenges would be housed in a Sky Ruin, like the co-op challenges I mentioned earlier, so I didn't have to awkwardly fit them into the infrastructure of the existing castle. I ended up abandoning this idea mostly because it felt tacked on. Seems kind of pointless to have all these extra challenges if it didn't even factor into your leaderboard time, right? Why not be its own game at that point? Here's how far I got with what I definitely consider the Castle in the Sky 2. It took the familiar architecture of Castle in the Sky, flipped it, and corrupted the environment to make for much trickier, nastier challenges. Looks like I was planning to incorporate enemies into it too. After playing around with the idea, it was ultimately scrapped as well. I had found that the formula I was working with just wasn't fun for me anymore. Ultimately, whatever I did with this weird, messed up castle would just not be cool enough for me to want to pursue, so I moved on to projects completely separate from this game style. So far, this history is pretty grim, right? If I had finished these projects, there would be a lot more to show here. That'd be a good 3.5 fully playable games. But unfortunately, that is not how things turned out. There was a good couple of years of that where I was just completely lost on what I wanted to make, and it didn't really get better until I released Gun Train Gauntlet in 2019, which was completely different from any of the games mentioned in this video. When it did get better though, it got a lot better. Nearly every project since then has been completed, and they're all available to play online right now. You can check them out in the BADGRAPHIX Creations Roblox group. I've taken various measures to make use of those old projects that were never finished since then. For limited time periods, I would showcase these old unfinished games in my Roblox group. Later on, I would create the BADGRAPHIX Creations Museum, a museum place containing a bunch of miniature versions of these retired and unfinished projects. That would have been the end of the story for a lot of these, including the Castle in the Sky sequels. But a while back, it hit me. I can just incorporate these games into Castle in the Sky itself. The idea wasn't unprecedented. While that post-game gauntlet I mentioned was never finished, the 2 Sky Ruins I did complete were well made and too good to simply scrap, so they were haphazardly slapped in at the end as bonus areas with no reward. This update I had percolating in my head saw to implementing them in all the other unfinished projects in a much more meaningful way. Think back. Remember how I talked about how the special abilities added a ton of new ways to route through the game? This update would do the same thing. My plan? Rework the content that did get finished in these scrap projects and turn them into Sky Ruins. The Sky Ruins would contain keys in them. Keys that you could get by playing through the game normally. But since they're also in these Sky Ruins, you could opt to skip the normal locations for those keys entirely if you wanted to. I could have stuck the portals to these Sky Ruins out in the open for anyone to stumble upon, but it didn't feel right. I didn't want to give these side areas equal billing to the rest of the game that was actually designed to be there. So instead, I did something way more fun. Hide them. All of the new side areas can be accessed by a player very early in their run, meaning if they know how to reach them, it can be an effective way to getting a low time on the leaderboards. However, they are all incredibly well hidden relative to any of the main content, so being able to locate them is a challenge in and of itself. While you got to take a look at these old unfinished games in this video, I made it a point to not show you how to access any of them so you can discover it for yourself. The footage used for these areas is also that of how they originally looked, not how they look implemented in-game as Sky Ruins. I really love when games have obscure secrets like this. From the secret truck in Pokemon Red, to all of the hidden stuff in Dark Souls, I find that well-hidden secrets, especially ones that reward you, go a long way to extending the life of a game. Even long after you've beaten them, they still provide something to chew on and return to for. Castle in the Sky is well past its prime now, but I'm hoping that these updates help to make it one of those games too. A game that even long after your first playthrough, you know there still exists something yet for you to discover. I've linked the Castle in the Sky game in the description if you're interested in playing it. You can also play more games by me in the BADGRAPHIX Creations group, also linked in the description. Enjoy the game, and if you want to take it upon yourself, I implore you to search out the new secret areas and see how these old abandoned projects were retooled to fit in. Adios!